The contrast between matter and mind, like a contrast in sex, is far from defeating a natural union between them. Nothing could be more intelligible to a sympathetic observer than such a differential harmony. And once he abandons the effort to express either fact in the categories of the other, or to make them pass into one another materially, as if they could form a single univocal sequence. Their conjunction is by a spontaneous conspiracy of complementary qualities in the material order, which is dynamic and continuous. This harmony cannot be contained, since one of the terms lies in another realm of being, yet that harmony can be prepared. A manifold of motions and tensions is often organized in an animal, such that all the elements and occasions are supplied requisite for a moral experience. Matter could go no further, but when it has gone so far, spirit has been generated and does the rest. Impressions and reflex actions evoke images, voices acquire meanings, instincts inspire longings. This completion is no addition to the material process, but a moral counterpart of what the process was as a whole, or, as we say, of what it meant. Such is the natural link between matter and mind, that bodily life should excite feeling, and that perception, emotion, and thought should report material events. Significance and sanity are great virtues for spirit in this world, yet they are not inseparable from it in its essence. Left to itself, spirit would be omniscient, or would think itself so, and, as is perhaps involved in omniscience, it would feel no regret and no desire. A spirit focused on particular impressions and troubled about particular events is evidently a foster child of matter. Why should anything be dangerous to spirit? Why should one essence fascinate or another fatigue? Why should spirit be torn away in tears from what it loves and be set everywhere by what it hates? Yet such are the first experiences of innocent spirit in this world, and the beginning of its inexplicable trials. At this late day, we know well enough what the material causes of these troubles are, so puzzling to the young spirit. The body must be healthy, well fed, well treated, allowed to grow and develop its faculties. Certainly, hygiene will prevent many a woe, and a spirit not smothered or maddened by disease ought to manifest more clearly its innate will or demands. Souls, in this respect, are like nations. In health, they take everything foreign for a challenge. In disease, everything native for an oppression. What then would be the free and native life of spirit, which it enjoys more and more when conditions are favorable and suffers more and more for missing when they are adverse? What is spirit naturally fit to do? For the sake of clearness, let me state at once the conclusion I shall come to. The reader will then see the details more readily in the particular perspective that concerns us here. This perspective is not psychological or historical, but religious, or rather what the ancients would have called philosophical. The end in view is liberation, or the attainment, if only in glimpses, of the highest good. The steps are to be regarded as steps towards that end. What profit has the spirit in existing, and who are its true friends and true enemies? To which I reply, the perfect function of spirit is pure intuition. By the very impulse that generates it, intuition tends to become pure. It is the movement of apprehension by which anything is given to consciousness, and there is a natural joy in it, whenever it can live unimpeded by fatigue or pain, and not harassed by care, fear, doubt, disease, or any other obsession about the not given. Distress at its source and distraction about its objects are the enemies of spirit, and salvation comes when it is freed from all the stress or distraction and becomes pure intuition. By the theme of that intuition, simple or complex, a breath of morning air, or the sum total of possible knowledge. The datum is never too simple if it calls forth a wholehearted response from the soul, and the datum is never too complicated if it does not overtax and confuse the scope of attention. In both cases, equally, intuition will be alert and happy. We see this in the play of young children, combative, adventurous, or sexual instincts, as yet not ripe and without fit occasions, overflow in play, and play in its first impulse is always joyful. Attention is spontaneous, and action is selective, being confined or expecting to be confined to so much as intuition can victoriously discover, trace, dominate, and delight in. By intuition, the reader will perceive, I do not mean divination, or a miraculous way of discovering that which sense and intellect cannot disclose. On the contrary, by intuition, I mean direct and obvious possession of the apparent, without commitments of any sort about its truth, significance, or material existence. The deliverance of intuition is some pure essence. The degree of truth or significance that this given essence may have as revealing a world of action, or as promising other intuitions, is an ulterior question, morally and cognitively important, but itself, when consciously considered, distracting the spirit from its native and present happiness. We have undeniably a more compact mind and a stronger will when the themes of our intuitions are relevant to our action, and we see with the clearness of genius the movement of things near us and of society. If we groped about the world always startled and aggrieved, and if we nursed a pure intuition only about imaginary things, we should be sick children, and our thin intuitions would grow thinner and wilder as our troubles grew thick. Nevertheless, in the most masterly mind, in the most victorious soldier or legislator, no profit or peace will come to the spirit except in pure intuition. When that dominated world and that brilliant career appear as if in another man's life, a tale, a vision, in which all passion has become light and all compulsion deliverance. Worldly victories are full of falseness and anguish. There must be a second victory of intuition over all victories before the spirit can triumph. Such a triumph over nature and human nature can never be complete, and the moments in which it almost exists are rare. Were intuition possible only at the top, in the wisest moments of life, it might be left to the saints and mystics to tell us about it. But intuition is primitive, it is pervasive. We cannot look or think without evoking it in 1,000 directions, for without it we should have no emotions, no images, no beliefs. It would be impossible for us to observe similarities or conjunctions or movements, or to feel implications. Indeed, it would be impossible for us to feel anything or be conscious at all, since intuition is a name for that spiritual wakefulness by which attention discerns characters and distinguishes one character from another. Intuition, then, is always with us, but dispersed over occasions that continually confuse and interrupt it. It is comfortably clear in the poet and the wit, sometimes in the child. It is the constant friend of the artist lost in his work. All I need do here is to disentangle it and consider what it would be if it were pure. In the first place, for a foundation, you might take the Aristotelian definition of intuition or of any instance of spirit as the second entelechy, the perfect actuality of organic life. Intuition not only exists, but is the most intense form of existence. Existence, by another definition, which at least in my view is fundamental, means flux, process, transition. Had we purely static being, we should lapse or rise into essences and should not exist. Now, this point might well provoke some controversy, because in the most opposite quarters, in Buddhism and in British philosophy, the existence of spirit is verbally denied as being a verbal fiction. According to one party, there are only illusions, and according to the other party, only data. Data and illusions, however, involve intuition. Otherwise, data cannot be given, and illusions cannot deceive. Moral presence, moral actuality, is essential to givenness, as moral deceitfulness is essential to illusion. Intuition crowns the bodily movements that underlie it by taking notice, by being a most acute, ideal concentration and moral effect of those movements, so that they now cause clear data, quite unlike their own physical texture, to arise and vanish before pure spirit. Intuition differs from the graphic or conceptual data so evoked in being itself a process and not an image, an event and not an idea, an existence and not an essence. It lends to those ideal and moral data the only existence of which they are capable. It enables them to appear. It justifies, when once we sharpen our concentration on the actually given, the Berkeleyan reduction of data of intuition to inert ideas or essences. Also, the moral discovery that essences, if supposed to exist on their own account, are illusions. There is an intense reality involved, but this reality is the life of the psyche, unconscious save precisely where it culminates in intuition and raises ideal essences into obsessions. These obsessions may be calm, steady, and normal, as when we look at a material object and study it. Every eye will not paint an identical picture, but each picture may be clear and sustained at will, or changing only as the material object itself changes. At other times, the psyche ferments inwardly under insufficient control from external facts, and the ghosts then called up, though plainly visible, prove to have no existence in nature and no definite reference to anything there. They signify only some inner agitation of the soul, and they signify even this only for the psychologist or on second thoughts. The datum of intuition, when fully realized and clarified, reveals nothing but itself to that intuition. It is an essence, and though it may be a picture of time, it knows no temporal neighbors. It is an idea, a concept, and not a moment in any existing or evolving world. Intuition, though it always has a natural ground, never can have a natural object, but only an ideal one. Nature has learned to know itself at this price, that its knowledge should be indirect and symbolic. It can describe itself only in words and had to invent them in order to think. If these sensible or intelligible symbols seem unreal in their ideality, the reality of existence, in its turn, seems no less ambiguous, since it continually falls between two stools. It is by not being, by merely ceasing to be one thing and becoming something different. In intuition, however, we have an instance of perfect actuality, a form of being that preeminently exists and moves, for it is a discovery and experience, yet it is precisely the act of arresting and defining some clear essence. This flash of light issues from sundry processes and tensions coming to a head and fusing their energies, but the confluence does not remain simply a fact about those processes. It generates a feeling. This feeling continually varies, like its psychological ground, but at each moment it brings some revelation to consciousness, having a precise and moral character, absolutely individual and like itself, however nameless and vague it may seem in relation to conventional human categories. The fruition of an organ, we have noted earlier, cannot arise until that organ has matured. A first sensation is therefore physiologically a last event. A full psychic life must have preceded, now perhaps interrupted, or perhaps brought to a head in some sudden movement. The vital background is far more stable, far wider than the flash of feeling. There was much more to be felt if we went in for feeling, and it was a mere accident that we felt this in particular. Thus, when the Indians tell us that in deep sleep we return to Brahma, we may say that from the point of view of spirit, they are describing the birth of spirit itself, representing the absence of consciousness as consciousness in a perfectly placid, equable, infinitely potential equilibrium. Logical vacancy would thus cover vital repletion, so we too, looking at life naturalistically from the outside, may well feel that spirit actually slumbers in all things, in a deep sleep, inclined to waking, but sleep, as it were, under tremulous eyelids. This is not a wholly fanciful notion, because something very like such a vacant but positive tension endures in waking life, supplying the background to all ulterior data. The glance of attention would disclose nothing distinct if a constant blank field, the specific datum of expectancy, did not spread round each image, precede it, limit it, contrast with it, and swallow it up in the end, much as the sea might swallow up an island, or the sky a star. Data which could never have been given to intuition except within those broader fields. Intuition is, in some sense, always a synthesis, even when the datum is an inarticulate feeling, like a scent or a pain. The very simplicity of such data proves this, not indeed to analysis, because no analysis is possible of the inarticulate, but to common sense, as soon as the very complex natural occasion for such simple feelings has been discovered. Yet the word synthesis is highly ambiguous and misleading, like the Kantian terms that have become convenient or indispensable. The danger is that what occurs in the realm of matter should be interpreted by literary psychology as occurring in the realm of spirit. In the realm of spirit, there is no machinery, nothing compounded, dynamic, mysterious, or latent. Therefore, there is no synthesis at that level. Although intuition momentarily manifests in an open datum, all surface, say, enjoy intricate processes that have been going on and combining in the animal psyche since the dawn of creation. The joy felt is a unitary effect of a multiple cause, itself felt only as a fountain of joy. A synthesis may therefore be said to have occurred, but not in consciousness. Consciousness gives the result of that synthesis. It does not give the elements, nor the process, nor the motive for the given formation. Idealists may say that all these unknown things occur in unconscious mind. Unconscious mind being an unfortunate name which they give to bodily life, when they are compelled to acknowledge that the body is not merely an image in the mind, but a dynamic heritage prior to consciousness and determining the images that shall appear. This dynamic heritage is the psyche, or the process of life considered objectively and as continuous with the vital heritage in seeds. It is something obscure but indubitably real and taking place in the material world. Being material, these processes are not mental, but being hidden and obscure, they are most readily distinguished by their occasional moral culmination in some feeling or image. Feelings and images may then be interpolated dramatically, even where certainly they do not exist, as in thunder and lightning. Such play of fancy is spontaneous in myth and in literary psychology, but to take it literally would be to explain the profound by the superficial, the dynamic by the pictorial, and often the real by the fictitious. Synthesis, conceived as a fusion of existential elements into a new existential unit, is therefore incongruous with spirit and belongs to the realm of matter. But before leaving it there, we may notice something proper and indeed essential to spirit that might be confused with an evolutionary synthesis. I mean, the intuition of relations, or as called by another Kantian name, the transcendental unity of apperception. When a datum is complex, attention in noticing the parts sees them in their common field, and initially qualified by their place there and their mutual relations. These relations may be static, and then, since spirit is volatile, it may return again and again to the same object, emphasizing each time a different feature and evoking a different essence. These successive intuitions can never be synthesized, They're events. They're unsubstantial. They blaze for a moment and vanish into nothing. But the deliverances of those moments may supplement one another as descriptions of the object or as mere experiences, and the subsequent intuition springing from the organic soil so tilled and fertilized may repeat those intuitions or variations of them in a fresh description of the object or poetic suggestion of it in its wholeness and in its destiny. Imagination may thus evolve and knowledge may increase, not by an impossible synthesis or breeding together of dead intuitions, but by the training of organisms and the complication of instruments, orchestrating a richer but no less fugitive life in the spirit. When the object is in motion, the perpetual variations in intuition have a double source, for besides the continual renewal of apprehension, always with a somewhat different volume, vivacity, and point of view, there is the flux of events, replacing one another before the eyes. Suppose I am watching a procession, or listening to music, or floundering through an improvised speech of my own. The vital continuity of consciousness is not suspended, and there is a comparatively stable background in my sense of the world and myself in it, against which I notice each new feature. And what is most marvelous, when we consider it, many features that have vanished from the world are still present, though fading in the temporal perspectives of the spirit. I know that this which has come is not that which is gone, and I can specify many a precise detail in which they differ. Even what is coming, or what ought to come, is present vaguely to my sense, and is recognized as normal or as surprising when it actually appears. Thus, intuition transcends in scope the sequence of events toppling over one another in the world, so that the picture of that world in imagination is much wider, much clearer, and much fairer than its aspect in any one instant. There is a nexus of events in the realm of matter, as they fuse and generate one another. There is a history of events in the realm of truth, where their essences, their sequence, and all their formal relations forever confront the spirit. And in the realm of spirit, there are partial and ever varied recompositions of events, as intuition catches glimpses of them in different perspectives. If intuition, then, pelts a static object with a variety of views, it lifts a fluid object, or a sequence of events, out of the irreparable flux in which it occurs and keeps its essence and its occurrence in mind as long as the intuition lasts. The selection of features appearing in such an intuition is made for it by the psyche under the physical influences of that moment. And here there is a real synthesis of tensions and processes. In the intuition, the given features are not synthesized, but discriminated, being first given in solution under that unity of apprehension without which no intuition could exist at all. The notion that intuition synthesizes its elements comes of hypostasizing these elements and imagining them to be separate existents that intuition must pick out and combine in an adventitious way, but neither intuition nor the features distinguishable in its field are physical objects of that sort, meeting and acting upon one another. They are not wooden pawns that a selective hand must take from the box, move about the chessboard, and sweep into the box again for use on another occasion. We are in the realm of spirit. Here the elements found are purely visionary essences, and the spirit finding them is pure light of attention. Essences have no hidden temporal persistence. Their so-called subsistence is merely their logical identity. Intuition, on its side, is not an operation performed by some pre-existing intellect. Intellect exists by intellection, and intuition is a moment of created spirit, not a power applied, but a brief life received. A different simile might express these facts better. Intuitions may be likened to soap bubbles. Soap bubbles are impossible to synthesize. If they touch, they vanish. Yet the surface of one may repeat the iridescence visible on the surface of several others. These colors are not taken from the smaller bubbles and transferred and rearranged on the larger one. They are reborn in each instance, in each degree of complexity, according to the circumstances of that more or less similar moment. Of those lights, of those spheres, nothing endures, but the soap suds and the air remain available for bubbles ad libitum, and the colors of the rainbow may be drawn upon forever for decoration without being exhausted. The reshufflings of all material, the pictures are all precarious, and their parts are created and sustained within them by the same rays and the same tensions that create the whole. In waking life, and even in sleep, intuition is normally uninterrupted, though what is constant there, amid a stream of changes, is singularly vague and nameless. Nothing could be more worthless to spirit than spirit dozing when all its specific functions and pleasures are in abeyance. Yet that dim spark of life, like a veilleuse in a sick room, keeps alive the sense of a shadowy ambience from which anything might emerge. Even in alert consciousness, this vague background endures, and normally any precise observation or distinct thought is preceded by a momentary pause, as it were for breath or to take aim. We thus fall back upon our physical resources for foothold before we leap. Then, the observation having been made, or the thought formulated, we relapse into the familiar hum of habitual living, with that clear moment marked as with a red letter, to be reverted to, if possible, upon occasion. Fundamentally, we must remember all time and all existence are open to spirit, and this virtual omnipresence renders something possible which would be utterly impossible if spirit were not transcendental, but were lodged successively in each of its data. I mean, the reference of a memory to its original, and the possibility of comparing the two and judging the memory to be inadequate. Do we then have two intuitions, one of the original and another of the reproduction. And can a third intuition compare the two? Not in the least. Intuitions are not objects, they are moments of spirit, qualitatively similar in their cognitive essence, which is absolutely intellectual and unpresentable to sense. They differ only in their themes. It is these two themes, which may be rival descriptions of the same fact in the posited natural world, that intuition may compare. When it retreats a little from its two former occasions and sees their two deliverances at once, perhaps together with a third view taken now of the same object. All views thus form one field of imagination and memory, open to repeated inspection and enlargement, and the diversity of such available ideas supplies all the alternatives between which judgment may waver. Whereas there is only one ultimate ambition of spirit everywhere, to embrace everything as does the truth, so there is but one total object for multiple consideration, namely, the whole course of nature, physical and moral, with the whole history of spirit included in it, and the whole realm of essence, spreading beyond the logical completement of any special universe. A survey of the successive is a deeply different fact from successive events surveyed. Before any survey is possible for the spirit, physical experience and organic memory must accumulate, giving the psyche a wider resonance and fresh capacities for reaction. Then these, until the psyche begins to decay, may supply a broadened basis for intuition. This is what fails to happen in the fool. No matter how much he may knock about the world or read in the newspapers, he will never put two and two together. His soul has little synthetic power, and his bubbling intuitions will be as bird-like, as shallow, and as absolute at the end as at the beginning. The great increase in science and in available information, therefore, does not ensure any greater wisdom in the public. On the contrary, it may occasion universal confusion and frivolity. Materials do not synthesize themselves by being heaped together. A spark of life, a synthesizing force, must arise in some organism, and then a spirit awakened there may rise above the flux, feel events toppling over one another, perceive their variety, their tendency, their promise, and live as much in what they have been and may be as in what, in the passing moment, they actually are. All minds belong to their time and place. Such is the condition of their existence that determines their point of view. Yet they are minds only in the measure in which they transcend their physical station and can view their place from other places and their moments from other moments. Organic rhythms are animated by what we have agreed to call a will, which, if conscious, would appear to spirit as pleasure or pain, success or failure. Intuition expresses such a rhythm, such a mode of vital appetition. If the trope initiated were never completed, no intuition or consciousness would arise at all, so that wherever there is consciousness, there is an element of organic success. a ground for joy. The organ of apprehension is working successfully. Intuition thus finds itself sympathetically participating in the process of creation and moving with it. This process cannot stop itself, and its various organs cannot spontaneously rescind their impetus, nor can spirit put the brake on them, as if it were an independent power or had a prior bent against the forces that bring it into existence, or would prefer to sleep on. Sleepiness is an intoxication of the organism, but spirit is light, and light, while there is fuel, can never be tired of shining. On the contrary, it clarifies and makes vocal the will that is at work, and does so faithfully and impartially, delivering the message it receives, whether of good or ill omen in the world's affairs. In primitive willlessness, there could be no will not to will, and the eternal indifference of Brahma could not prevent the world from arising. Rather, that deep sleep was secretly prolific. The whole realm of essence enveloped it like something forgotten, yet somehow known, which silently invited dreams of all sorts to unfold themselves. Yet, when willlessness is not merely the mutual arrest of innumerable wills, as perhaps it is in the depths of matter, but is rather, as in spirit, the fruit of will realized, it retains the image and the love of what was willed, without the propensity to create it. Such clarified willlessness is the result of experience and discipline, and is willless only in respect to existence, being still the will to understand that which exists. Passions and dreams are then recovered without illusion, and experience is gathered together in intuition without being any longer ignorantly traversed through birth and death. There is an oversight possible here that sometimes vitiates asceticism. The vulgar, we feel, move with the blind will to live. Spirit withdraws from that vain and horrible struggle, makes for peace, or even for non-existence. It may do so, but only by a revulsion that is physical and temporary. A satirist or an elegiac poet is free to dwell only on what the universal Penelope does at night when she destroys her day's work. Yet in Penelope, all is not self-contradiction. Her impulse is not now earnestly to weave and now earnestly to unweave what she has woven. She is busy without conviction and destructive without rage. A shrewd light twinkles in her eye, and her apparent folly serves to defend her liberty. Something heroic and humorous within triumphs in the very futility of her action. So intuition profits by the vanity of life and quietly takes note, while the cycles of growth and decay succeed one another. To these vicissitudes, it adds something different and positive that covers both movements alike. It does so by virtue of its own will, at whatever point it arises, and does not tend either to prolong the ascent or hasten the descent. of natural seasons. For intuition springs out of a power present in animal life to respond from one center to influences and inheritances coming from a distance, and to trace relations backwards and forwards in quality and quantity over all being. The sensitiveness is physical, the intuition spiritual. The one establishes, the other expresses a vital harmony in the movement of things. There is therefore no hostility to nature in spirit. Where hostility appears, we may justly suspect some earthly demon of desire prompting us to hate all that is not food for our own lusts. In nature, lusts and conflicts are inevitable, since everything has a will of its own. Yet to note the variety and contradiction of these wills is a great feat, a great exaltation for the spirit, and a great joy. This joy will indeed be mixed with sorrow, so long as the psyche is reluctant to change or to die, and consequently, while the old Adam kicks at the pricks, the organ of spirit in ascetic discipline cannot but strive to liberate and vivify itself at the expense of all unreconciled passions. But no passion is warmer than the zeal to see, to discover, to master the truth, to rescue the spirit from confusion and slavery, even at the price of perceiving the vanity of life. In this book, I am deliberately taking the point of view of spirit fully awake, contrasting itself with other things, and aspiring to its own freedom and perfection. That is the supreme question for the inner man. But we must not suppose or seem to expect that spirit or anything else should have been produced with an eye towards its ultimate good. That good cannot be chosen or pursued until the creature exists whose good it is to be. You must have a native direction before you can have a goal. Like other natural growths, spirit finds its life taking shape gradually, developing in this direction and in that, retreating, recommencing, piling up great enterprises that collapse in a deluge or in a confusion of tongues, and only after many readjustments, reaching a clear perfection of some particular sort. Nature will move on, and spirit may be launched into other adventures, but a possible culmination will have been attained under the form of eternity in one art which will unite forever in mutual understanding all creatures that, at any time or place, may have that vocation. There are many creatures in many circumstances that possess consciousness, but if we find in one instance what such consciousness would become if it were free and favored by fortune, we have a criterion for judging, or rather for feeling, its virtue wherever it exists. Intuition, happy in itself and pledged to nothing further, is such a criterion. This does not mean that pure intuition was established first for its own sweet sake, and then was rudely disturbed by other processes irrelevant to it. Such is the illusion created in the spirit, an illusion that itself proves a great obstacle to peace. When we presume that, because we are minds, all things ought to minister to us, or even cannot exist, save by virtue of our attention to them. This ought is the cry of selfishness. This cannot, the cry of pride. Psyches do not become conscious for the sake of consciousness. They become conscious automatically in acquiring a special organic responsiveness and heed of relations, and this plunges them into a far more agitated and perilous life than they led before. In their vegetative phase, they are launched into action and passion. Thus, spirit is born the twin of trouble. The pure joy and knowledge that, should come to it, can come only in snatches, or in ultimate concentration and solitude. Such solitude is not empty, it is solitude in the presence of anything and everything, the solitude of the traveler and witness, the essential stranger, whose proper interest is impartial, but who is caught and jostled in a press of troubles not really his own. Yet it was impossible, logically as well as physically, that a living spirit should exist where there was no will, no agent, no environment, no contingency, and no fatality. These circumstances and prerequisites supply the interest and theme of the drama. The given predicament might indeed have been different, and the vital impulse different. Such a diversity does not disturb the intrinsic ambition of spirit. Wherever it may arise, at every stage of its manifestation, it will show its true colors modestly and momentarily here, proudly and systematically there. This moral liberty cannot be forfeited while intuition subsists, since this liberty is internal. When, on the contrary, spirit beats its wings unreconciled against natural bars, it proves how completely it has been deceived about the direction of its possible freedom. It might have been seeing in that cage. False starts and failures are not the spirit's fault. They are its fate, its hereditary slavery, from which it may be freed if it lives long enough. As the first vital harmony brought it forth, a second may redeem it. For we must not suppose that any malice animates nature in regard to spirit, or any reluctance to evoke spirit and give it free rein. On the contrary, the often inopportune existence of spirit in some sorry and hopeless plight proves that nature is only too well disposed towards such development. It emanates from incipient harmonies, and every species of plant and animal, even the most wretched, shows how persistently nature flows into every possible shape. Yet the types established are as specific as they are stubborn, since the first stages have to be hereditary and well protected. If the organism is to be widely diffused or highly elaborate, otherwise the endless potentiality of matter would remain chaotic. We must therefore not be surprised at the fixity of will in us, physical and moral, or at the consequent peril and suffering besetting us on every side. After a season of incubation, while our nature takes shape in the dark, we are born into a world that cannot be altogether friendly. There must be not only buffets and denials, but more subtle assault of circumstances, contaminating the very psyche in which the spirit lives, and creating strange vices and ambitions. Like a child in a den of thieves, spirit is then taught crime as a duty. Intuition is not suffered to be pure. Scarcely has it begun to distinguish an essence when it is rudely summoned to confuse it with something different, and in this confusion to become impatient instead of joyful, to hate, to fear, and, what is most insidious, to claim possession of its objects, as if they were things or pledges, and not innocent essences. So the interrupted life of intuition is entangled with the incongruous rhythms and conflicts of other organs and of alien things. Yet at this level, again, a second humbler but wiser life of spirit may begin. Piety, religion, and science may insinuate themselves beneath free intuition, darkening its face while deepening its meaning, and turning it from vision into faith and knowledge. There is indeed a sense in which intuition itself is cognitive from the beginning. It is apprehension of something distinct, capable of being recognized and spoken of again. Yet this something might be a pure feeling or idea, enriching the mind, but conveying no knowledge of anything further, in a pregnant and transcendent sense. Therefore, intuition is not knowledge. It is the mere possession of a thought, which need have no object other than the essence revealed in it. So all exercise, play, and fiction, all poetry and music, expand the spirit congenially, give it a tone and cogency, perhaps very precious to it, without conveying knowledge of anything else. Yet this purity of intuitive life, though it appears in snatches at any stage, can attain to solidity and permanence only in arts, like language, that have a broad basis and use in the world. The clear profit brought thereby to the spirit may be ultimately only intellectual or aesthetic, a play of ordered imagination, yet imagination has been evoked in the first place by the senses in physical contact with external things, and it has been corrected and made inveterate by continual experience. Even the purest psychic fictions, such as logic or grammar, would not long hold their own if directly or indirectly they did not reflect the structure of the world. So also, a symbolic poet, interested only in the music and emotion of words, must involuntarily feed his art upon nature, if it is to touch his soul. In some animals, perhaps nothing comes to consciousness before the outer senses are stimulated by some sudden change in the environment. Intuition, then, will be an index, in some respects, to the assault of an influence and to the character of its source, and probably not merely a passive index, but an active perception, because intuition, being essentially cognitive and spiritual, it has an intrinsic light to turn upon anything that may confront it. And the psyche being, in this case, tensely directed upon the source of stimulation, intuition absorbs that vital intent and becomes animal faith, a specific assurance and expectancy turned towards the not given. That attention should be turned towards the not given may seem a contradiction in terms, and would be such if attention were always pure intuition, since then the datum would be the whole object, and this object a pure essence. But in fact, attention is always attracted, in the first instance, to the not yet given, because the psyche is struggling with a disturbance or uneasiness of which she has as yet no idea, and this idea, when it now begins to take shape, indicates that disturbance or uneasiness without in the least encompassing or exhausting the truth about it. Intuition is born smothered in intent, and intent is precisely assurance and expectancy turned towards the not given. The act of recoiling precedes any idea of what that may be from which we recoil. Shaken by the blow, we look to see what has hit us, and the act of grasping, clinging, or pursuing precedes and guides attention to the object grasped, clung to, or pursued. Some intuition accompany the primary movement, else there would be no consciousness of it. But we hardly have words for essences so generic and inarticulate as are given in sheer alarm, lust, impatience, or effort. These terms, which we say denote feelings, really denote for our adult minds the occasions and actions that are visible when we use them. We never name our own passions until we catch them in the mirror of the world. Yet the passions are not unconscious, across the background of the habitual scene, which may be a blank, a light, a shadow, a suction, a tension, pass and transform themselves as we live on, and we act under high pressure of an inward fatality or will that is conscious of its fury, but not until afterwards of its acts. Thus, attention to the not given, anxiety, suspense, precipitation dominate the spirit in the beginning, and the element of clear intuition, the sense of what is happening in reality, even within the mind, though always present, remains inarticulate. In this way, it happens that, though the spirit be essentially joyful, it is born, bred, and propagated in distress. Tension towards the hidden or distant yields intellectual dominion when it becomes clear intuition, but before being dominion, it halts, usually at interest, inquiry, or pursuit, and this element of suspense constitutes the transcendent force of true knowledge, which takes the datum of intuition for a sign of something beyond. Such belief involves a claim, as pure intuition does not. It is subject to danger and error, and therefore never puts the cognitive powers of spirit at ease. Spirit instinctively transposes impressions into images, and beliefs into imaginative heirlooms, as in myth and legend, metaphysics and theology. To meditate on an article of faith is to replace it, as far as possible, by an intuition. Imagination advances as material reference recedes, until in mystical ecstasy, possession renders all faith unnecessary. On the other hand, intelligence essentially requires postulates and moves in the sphere of belief, and intelligence rather than idle intuition was what the psyche required when she gave birth to spirit. It was in learning to behave intelligently that she stretched those threads of telepathic communication, which, when duly connected, struck the first spark of intuition. And we may say that as intuition is cognitive of essence, even when not conveying any knowledge of fact, so it is intelligent and conclusive even when not positing any external object. For intuition is an act and has an organ, so that it executes a movement and traverses duration in merely arising. We cannot see or hear without tracing the datum, and tracing it would be profitless to the spirit if retracing it were impossible, since an intuition that lost its themes in the act of evoking them would be at best a spiritual atom, adrift in infinity, and no part of any spiritual life. Thus, memory, consecutive discourse, allegiance to old loves and to old knowledge belong to the grain of spiritual reality, yet they contain faith in the not given, and thereby transcend intuition. For on a small scale or on a large scale, intuition is something ultimate, a culmination of many processes that, from the spiritual point of view, are subsidiary. All that self-transcendence which is involved in action, in belief, in expectation, must itself be transcended and embraced in intuition before a spirit can be happy. When scattered experience is synthesized in memory and scattered aspirations in worship, they become a single panorama and a single love. The whole course of a life is raised to a present datum, possessed virtually in all its details by the dramatic imagination, as all the convolutions of a piece of music are retained virtually in the finale. Then a body of positive knowledge, a fact, acquires the values of fiction. The man has actually lived through the adventures that on his deathbed or in heaven he sees spread before him as a story. But its spiritual reality now swallows up for him the accident of its material enactment, once upon a time in his accidental person. He accepts and forgives himself and ceases to repine at his destiny, because a spirit is now awake in him that is not limited or defiled by those obsessions, now no more its own than those of any other creature. Hope and fear have become vision of the truth, and if that vision is itself lurid and burdened with too much thunder, even the vision of the truth can be dismissed or sublimated into one pattern among 1,000 in the realm of fancy. Since these phases of spirit do not generate one another, but each goes with some special phase of organic life, there is no telling by moral analysis in what order spiritual experience may develop. Moral classifications are possible only if the moments of a given history are distinguished by the relative purity of intuition in them. We might arrange them in a circular or spiral order, from intuition empty to intuition filled with all truth. For according to the Indians, who know more about this than we do, deep sleep, being perfect bliss, must be a kind of intuition, yet empty, and I think an intuition filled with the truth, about which we know more than they did, would be perfect bliss too, if our whole psyche were absorbed in conceiving that truth, with no other wish subsisting. And in that case, it would be indifferent that this truth happened to be true rather than mere poetry, since it would be only as poetry that the spirit would entertain it. Pure intuition, even when filled with infinite detail, would thus revert to the perfect peace of pure being. On this hint, we might sketch the earthly round of spirit, descending from heaven, empty and open to every illusion, and ascending into heaven full, but thoroughly purified. A deep prenatal sleep might be first broken by a feeling of pressure, which, if intensified, would become pain. A sense of inescapable duration, a dread of change, or a longing for it, would create temporal perspectives forward and back into an oncoming future and a receding past, both ambiguously present and both unseizable. These would form a ghostly world to which spirit somehow would feel that it belonged. and from which the real world would be hard to disentangle. Yet those vital emotions and those temporal perspectives would have had no consistence if they had contained no images and supplied no recognizable ideal terms in which spirit might describe them. Nature and history would thus gradually take shape before the distracted spirit and would reveal to it the secret of its own destiny. Anxiety and craving would dissolve before this redeeming knowledge, and the universe would be clarified into a complex essence, given pure and untroubled to intuition. Spirit, so enlightened, would be again at peace. When the Indians tell us that such peace is bliss, we may be inclined to smile or to call them pessimists, as if only the negation of existence could seem to them good. And when our own religion bids the dead rest in peace, we may suspect that some early fancy about wandering ghosts survives in our liturgy, contrary to the hope of glory. But perhaps we are deceived in our cleverness. When peace or deep sleep returns to the spirit, the multitudinous vibration of nature that supports spirit has not ceased. It continues and will continue forever, and new occasions for waking and troubling will break out in 1,000 places. Spirit, considered as a natural concomitant of nature, never can rest in peace. Yet at any point, by its own insight, summing up nature, it may achieve tranquility. It is only redeemed spirits, fidelium anime, that can rest in peace. It would be senseless to call down peace on the others. This peace is therefore a quality of life, not of death, and perhaps the bliss of Brahma might be understood in a similar way. When the sense of identity with what is common to all things causes their differences and oppositions, without being historically destroyed, to be balanced and mutually cancelled in our allegiance, so that Brahma is all things, and yet is none of them, as warmth is something diffused and inarticulate, born of infinitesimal, pervasive vibrations. So deep sleep may be a nameless happiness, brooding over a sea of troubles. We are justified in distinguishing this state from non-existence, not only morally, as escape from all evil, but also physically, by virtue of the concourse of wills in it from all quarters, suspended by their mutual incompatibility, yet rich each with its possible good. This latent, infinite aspiration lifts the deep peace of the universal psyche into a limiting instance of spirit, as if love of all good lived there without experience, and therefore without loss. Love is hardly, in itself, an object of intuition, since it becomes conscious only when it is love of something, and yet love is independent in origin from the intuition of its object. It colors this object with a quality which is not beauty or clearness, such as the joy of pure intuition would endow it with. Love seeks possession. It experiences a physical affinity between the psyche and the object, and attaches the will to that object like a child to its mother, prior to any clear idea of it, so that here the spirit is caught in the leash, restrained, and crawled back insistently more to an active influence than to the essence that represents it in intuition. Love suffers and hopes. It is attached in its aspiration to something not spiritual. It clothes this something as best it may in spiritual guise, but constantly with the sense or the fear of a misfit, of a disappointment. We sometimes find that the mother we love is not the mother we should have liked, and spirit at every turn has that painful experience. The estrangement flows from the native predicament of spirit in being incarnate, lodged in a particular place, time, and person, while its intrinsic ambition is universal. Love, like knowledge, is of the contingent, by the contingent. Both knowledge and love are therefore, in one sense, distracting, since they bind spirit to something particular and pre-existent, other than the spontaneous play of intuition. Yet these bonds are the first roots of spontaneity itself, giving existence and specific impulse to the spirit, since the whole power in spirit is natural, as the whole glory of nature is spiritual. Attachment presupposes attachment, but attachment, when it becomes conscious, in love or knowledge, has already begun to transcend the object of attachment, partly by seeing its limitations and its surroundings in the world, partly by sublimating it into an idea and turning it from the brute fact that it was into a part of the furniture of mind. And how shall any local personal love become just, sure, and enlightened? Not by being disowned, for we should soon be disowning spirit itself, but by being understood and seen to be legitimate and beautiful in its place, as other loves are legitimate and beautiful in their places. Vital attachment to the life of nature thus has ideal fidelity for its counterpart in the life of spirit. Animal instincts attract attention to specific objects. Action and passion, in passing, leave a settled propensity in the psyche to repeat those movements or to recoil from them, and this quickened attention and these well-learned lessons of experience sharpen and fix in the mind the terms of its memory and logic. In this intellectual field, experience can be cumulative. Each term retains its meaning, and when further experience or consideration shows that essence in a new light, displaying one or another of its necessary relations to other essences, its identity is not destroyed but vindicated, since its place and function are defined more and more perfectly in the great mosaic of terms composing a coherent language for that spirit. It is the primary nature of intuition to exhibit something specific, to clarify and define it, and also to keep that definite term in mind, as we say, not of course in consciousness, except occasionally, but in reserve in the penumbra of essences to which a reference is possible, and which silently buttress the meaning and quality of every other essence that may come before us. Conventionally considered, and from the point of view of language and material knowledge, human ideas are vague and shifting, so that no two men can think alike, and no two readings of the same poem can produce the same impression. But if instead of referring ideas to conventional standards, never actually specified, we consider each actual intuition in itself, it is necessarily absolutely clear and definite, revealing the precise essence that it reveals. Some intuitions will be more prolonged or emphatic than others, so that the essence given in them may have a better chance of reappearing in later intuitions, or one almost like it, and of being designated by some word, and it will be only the approach to constancy in the meanings of words or of other signs that will enable the mind to enlarge its scope and to preserve its acquisitions. In the life of reason, this intrinsic growth within intuition may be overlooked, because what interests the moralist is the harmony to be attained between desire and thought on the one side, and nature and destiny on the other. The ideal for him is psychic adaptation rather than spiritual freedom, although spiritual freedom would be achieved perhaps in some at first painful or unpalatable form if social harmony were once established. Such freedom could be attained, however, only after a great slaughter and sacrifice of spirits. And intuition has its intrinsic reality and value quite as much in the spirits condemned by circumstances as in the spirits approved and declared triumphant. Even such wisdom as the discipline of experience may achieve is bought at a price, and is a terrible drag on the discursive freedom of spirit, clipping its wings for any far migration. Piety, in domesticating the spirit in one specific region, educates it to be partial, prejudiced, and unjust. It seems to attach love to illusion and life to that which, by its very nature, is condemned to death. Incompleteness and distraction thus enter into the heart of spirituality, contradicting its native vocation to be clear, comprehensive, and free. The great privilege of the immaterial, however, is to be indomitable, as existence can neither abolish any essence by neglecting it, nor smirch it by dragging it down into the flux of change. So animal life cannot annul the discoveries which it has once made. It may extinguish the light of attention and of memory by destroying the organs and records that might have kept that knowledge alive in the world. But the autonomy of spirit, while spirit lives, is inalienable. The things felt will have been felt, the things loved will have been loved, whatever may ensue, and no contrary judgment supervening will ever have the field to itself. Ignorant as it may be of all contradictions, it will be contradicted. Unconscious as it may be of alien goods, the alien goods will exist, so that the clouds that traverse the spirit in being seen are in one sense abolished. Spirit has outflanked them, set them down to be clouds, and thereby vindicated the supremacy of light and of vision. Evidently, in the absence of intuition, there would be no judgment or valuation at all, no spiritual witness to observe the world or to question it, and if the actual observations or questionings made by anybody be referred to some ulterior authority, that authority can be only that of a further intuition. There is indeed the dynamic authority or laughter of things going their way, doing their work, and crushing all judgments. But this is a triumph for them only in our own estimation. They themselves do not boast, they most humbly and uncomplainingly endure their strains and precipitate their cataclysms, so that intuition shines alone in its moral heaven among other intuitions, and even these do not shine together in any common medium, but only each in each when they think of one another.